news that took everybody by storm. Vancouver, after becoming one of the most going through one of the most relevant time periods in their existence, right? They joined in 2011, and since then, we're basically nobody cared about them outside of when Camilo Sanvezo won MLS Golden Boot once and then bounced. And then Vanni Sartini comes in and makes them Canadian Cup champions, puts them in the Champions League, puts them in the running for MLS Cup, gets players playing well into their best peak performance, and he's been sacked by Vancouver. Do you think this is the right move?
Uh, I hope you're happy for YouTube comments because I'll give you some more here. Um, well, for one, I will say this in Vancouver's defense before we move on. They also had that 1 year in 2015 where they were actually really good. So it's not just Camilo Sanvezo winning Golden Boot and dipping. They also have 2015. So give them credit where it's due. But yeah, I feel like they were heading towards like Gary Smith territory in Nashville, where you got a good team that can make the playoffs. Granted, it's technically not even the case. And they kind of fizzle out at that point because, yeah, sure, Vancouver's won Canadian championship 3 times in a row. It's also not exactly the strongest competition right now because Toronto haven't been very good and Montreal have been okay at best, like a borderline play-in playoff team. So they were the best, I feel like, on paper heading into or based on 2023 and 2024. So I'd say those two, they should be winning. They did, which is a credit to him. I'm not saying he shouldn't get deserve to get the honors of winning that competition, but he got them to mid-table finishes in the Western Conference, getting them into the playoffs. That's good. Like a little bit of consistency here at 2023 and 2024. But that's as far as it went. I mean, it never went past round one. They haven't been to a quarterfinal of the playoffs since 2017. So I think the team, maybe it's a mistake. I don't know. I mean, I think he's got players playing well. We've seen what Brian White and Ryan Gauld have brought to the table. He can clearly get things out of players and make them play well. But maybe it's on the front office that this should be more focused on than Vanni Sartini. Have they supplied him with the right resources to take that next step and start winning playoff games and start challenging higher up in the Western Conference? So I don't really want to blame him without really blaming the front office as well, because I feel like we've talked about them just not really spending much for this team. And like anytime they have any semblance of a good player, they just sell them like almost immediately. So I think it's in that regard, it's harsh on Vanny for not really giving him the right resources to fully challenge. But it did seem like they were kind of stuck in like mid-table Western Conference.
For me, I don't believe it's the right move yet. I don't disagree with you that they were trending towards Gary Smith territory. I actually, my first instinct was like, what a terrible decision because Vanni Sartini's is vibes point oh. Like when you're looking for, forget the game, forget the tactics or the players. You need somebody to give you vibes. Vanni Sartini's the guy. You need a quote machine. Vanni Sartini's your guy, right? But I started doing just a quick look. Right, he came in 2021 all the way through now. Vancouver were bottom five, bottom half, bottom six, bottom half, or bottom third, rather, in payroll. The time that they snuck into the almost in the top half, the player that they bought for that little increase? A player called Chow Alexander. Remember him?
Of
Yeah.
course, I remember him.
Yeah. One of the guys that we thought was going to be an absolute nightmare for this league, that Vancouver finally looking to be spenders and really dive into the market, which is going back to our other conversation, right? When we talk about like, oh, everybody's going to South America, picking up South Americans, and then, oh, most of them are flopping. Chow Alexander, great example of that, right? Now you start putting Ryan Gauld in there. You start putting a Brian White who's working well with Ryan Gauld. You start putting in Stuart Armstrong, who's also playing at a pretty decent level with them. And you're starting to put together pieces that he can then compete with. But you look at the teams he's going up against, right? The LAFCs, the LA Galaxies. It's like those sorts of players are okay, but they're not competitive at that next tier up, right? What I would have liked to see is if he was able to be given that extra boost, right? They had what was his name? Andres Kubas, who I thought was a good piece to work around. If you paired him with one other player who was half decent, right? Pedro Vite, not so much in the mix of things, really didn't hold up there. Their biggest, I don't want to say their biggest, but one of their biggest investments this year was 35-year-old Damir Kreilach. What are we doing? Like I get it. I understand the model and you're Vancouver and whatever, but you can't put that. That's like asking or asking anybody to take a bunch of rocks and just make the statue David. You just don't do that with just a bunch of. You need something special to do that, right? So, you, I don't believe that the the group that he had reflected the a bit or the group that he had. I don't think he could have gotten out of them what Vancouver I think was expecting, and that
No,
can
I
be
think that's
argued,
fair.
right, for sure, and um, you know, listen, he was not he didn't win much, right? Like you can't argue that he was like he won Canadian championships, right? He got into Champions League. I'm not saying that's something to sneeze at, but he beat two teams. He beat a Montreal side and the worst TFC team in a decade, right? And then a bunch of CPL teams. That's I understand why people are like, oh, he's winning that and he's getting in Champions League. That's great, but what are your bigger goals? I don't disagree. Like you could feel it was kind of lulling into we've been here before. But I think
Yeah,
that he
and
deserved a little bit of time.
yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think nothing's going to change unless the front office makes changes. Like you could bring in whatever coach you want. If you're not going to give them the resources to compete, you're not keeping up with the LA Galaxies and LAFCs anymore. This just like the parity is starting to kind of spread out in this league. You're just not going to be able to get by with not spending anymore, and
Hmm.
Vancouver's going to have to change that unless they want to just keep repeating this. And the one thing I will say though is, you could talk about you're like, oh, we're consistently getting into the CONCACAF Champions League, and I think that's great. But it's like, what are you doing in the CONCACAF Champions League? It's like, okay, we're getting there a bunch of times. How do we take that next step and actually be competitive in it? And they did a pretty good job in 2023. They made it to the quarterfinals, but then 2024 first round knockout. So it's like, all right, well, if that happens again next year, then it's like, all right, at what point are we like, great, we can win this basically three-team tournament and make it into CONCACAF Champions League where we're just going to get smoked again
Hmm.
because we're not investing in the team. So,
Well, and
uh,
I think you made a really good point too about the turnover that this team has, right? And we joked about it before with Beta. Like I remember Imbom Huang, right? Remember when Adam was still here, we were talking about him as like, oh, this dude's lighting it up, and we were all hyped. And then like 2 weeks later, he was spacking, right? And that was like the vibe of this team. I just went through some of their top departures, right? Chow Alexander, we just talked about. Julian Gressel was not happy there, so you had one of the best attacking wingbacks in MLS had to leave. You had to replace him. Sergio Cordova, one of their, attacking players that was supposed to balance out Brian White in any way, shape, or form, was sold. And then Simon Bichère, who was supposed to be the next guy up, got hot for like 2 minutes. They sold him for 400K, and then he was brought back. St. Louis has him now, and he torched up St. Louis. He scored like 7 goals in like 10 games or something like that. It's like what I understand the profile, right? I'm a Red Bull supporter. I get the whole like use youth for profit or whatever, but you also then can't ask your coach to perform miracles. I just think it's rough.
yeah, I think Sartini's a guy where I'm not usually in favor of like, oh, let's give these other MLS coaches like let's keep
I know you're
rotating
a
MLS
hater
coaches
of a
after they've been
recycle.
fired. Yeah, well, I don't mind the recycle if the coach has been successful. I don't like the recycle if the coach has not been successful. I think Sartini's one where I would want to see him get another chance with another team, one that's going to like properly back him up and spend. So
You
hopefully
know,
he gets that opportunity.
you know who has a ton of money sitting around and has no problem spending?
I'm not going to go that far yet. Let's see what
Atlanta
happens.
United would be a great fit. Can you just
I'm
imagine
not
Atlanta
fully
United?
I'm not fully against it, but like he's also not my top choice.
Just imagine, right? Like you've got Atlanta United, you've got like all of these high level players and Vanni Sartini, he's just on the sideline, like in a tracksuit walking off the field, like giving all these like s- things we can't even say on air to the referees, like just such scenes. So that's actually a really good transition point, though. We've been talking about this roster, how we think it's underbuilt and underdeveloped. Is there anybody that this group can bring in that will actually get this roster to where they want to be, or is this going to be just a cycle of the Red Bull system where oh you can't win MLS Cup with 19 teenagers and one semi decent designated player? Oh, you're out. Next guy up, right? Is there anybody who can get Vancouver up?
I honestly don't think so right now because I mean I think about the team and maybe I'm just not thinking about it correctly. Maybe I need to like put some more time into actually like looking into the team. But when I kind of think about their main guys on the team and who's mainly in the mix, getting a lot of minutes and whatnot, I don't even think of a lot of guys that have come through like their academy that have been kind of bursting into the team. Like I know there's obviously like they have the creme de la creme of Alfonso Davies and no better academy product than that. But otherwise, I just don't think of a lot of guys coming through their academy that have like kind of burst into this team. So I can't even be like, oh, bring in a Jim Curtin because Jim Curtin, he's clearly shown that he can win and win trophies with not a ton of investment and kind of having to do it through the youth system. But that I feel like it was a different scenario where Philly were like having a lot of really good recruits, actively investing in their youth academy. And I'm not sure that Vancouver is exactly doing the same. They're kind of just being like, oh, we want you to go find diamonds in the rough in the transfer market so we don't have to spend a ton of money. Um, and that's how you're going to build out your team. And I just don't think there's a coach on the market right now that's going to be able to come in and take that same mindset and take them to challenging in the West and winning trophies. So I genuinely I don't think there's anybody that they can bring in that's going to take them to the next level. I think at best they're getting similar to what they have now, like making the playoffs but not really challenging further than that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the way I would have put it. But I do think this: you might not get somebody to get their roster better, but think about coaches that you can get that match the vibes. Maurizio Sarri's not coaching anybody right now, and that dude, I feel, would be a complete like level shift for vibes, right? He's out there just 2 packs a day yelling at Ryan Gauld, enough with the fancy stuff. Keep it simple.
I think it's funnier to imagine him yelling everything in Italian and nobody having
No,
any idea what he is saying.
you got Takioka in the goal being like, the fuck is he talking about?
What is this guy saying?
You wanted to go long? You wanted to go short? What do you want? Oh
If
man.
Vancouver manages to somehow lure Maurizio Sarri to coach the Whitecaps, then I will take back everything I just said about them.
That'd be really, really funny. I'm going to look up just because it feels like a place that's going to go former MLS, right? It does. That's just the way it feels. So I'm looking at these coaches.
I think they're going to go internal. I mean, that's what they did with Sartini. I think they're going to do that again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this, right? Like maybe a stretch, right? Rob Valentino's available. Rob Valentino, maybe not the best coach, but they're not looking for the best. They're looking for a guy who's going to get the most out of a roster that they don't need to invest in. And what did he just do? He took a roster that had minimal investment after they sold all their players and got them past Inter Miami and nearly into a conference oh, conference final. Conference final. So um,
Minimal
I'm
investment's a
not
strong word.
minimal investment relative to what they're used to having, right? Like he used to be an assistant with again Georgios Giacomakis and Thiago Almada, and then he was playing Jamal TRA, who they didn't even bring back with no, yeah, Moranchuk was behind him, but Moranchuk needs players around him. That dude doesn't do enough on his own, but that's a different story for another day. Gary Smith is still involved. It'd be interesting to
Yeah,
see.
I mean, we were just comparing him to Gary Smith. I mean, might as well just bring him in and
Right,
complete the
it might
transition.
it might not be a shock. I don't hate the internal shout either. I don't if I looked up
I don't know who it would be. And there's no way you're looking up their internal coaching roster right now. We can figure that out off air. The Vancouver fans can tell us.
Michael D'Agostino,
Yeah,
Yusef
here he goes anyway.
Daha, Andrew Foster, video analyst. YP Lee is the vice president of Vancouver Whitecaps. What?
Who?
YP Lee. Remember the when we were doing
Oh,
the this was back in season 1 and we were doing the we forgot you played here. He was a guy who we forgot played there. He was a left back for Dortmund for a long time. And he played like a season and a half of Vancouver and nobody remembers him. He is now the vice president. That's so funny. We forgot
That's
you
great.
played here. We
Nobody's
forgot
gonna know about it because I'm gonna cut all this out.
you're a loser. Um, anyways, yeah, I don't think anybody can get this roster to a better spot, but time will tell. Time will tell.